Greetings, Star Trek Fleet Commanders. I am the Angry Rhino. Please like the video and subscribe to the channel. Now, as I alluded to in my last video, I was working on another video to talk about some of the certain ship types and how they may be useful, or maybe more useful than some of the other ones. And before I get right into it, we're talking about faction ships here. Faction credit comes into play, and I realized, actually, I guess I've off and on remembered that I haven't really explained this feature of Voyager Loop. I think I've probably remembered and forgotten 3 or 4 times by now. But not only is there a token system to go in and mine or grind out some of this anomaly samples, there's a few stages. You can see little dotted lines that come off the path here. And those systems start with FSEP. You see one of this one here, and then there's that one, and then there's this one. Well, if you notice, there are a few other systems, and again, you can see by the dotted line that comes off the main chain. The main chain is solid. These auxiliary systems, I guess, are dotted lines. And you click on them, you see how that's a name, not FSEP. This one's a name. This is also a name. These are the systems that you go into and you'll find the Borg, assimilated Borg scouts, or scouts that have been assimilated by the Borgs. That's where you can get a lot of faction credit. I mean, not faction credit, faction messages. And like what I was showing you with the incursion trick, activate that exocom for extra loot. These faction messages, I keep saying faction credits, these faction messages that are dropped in these other systems here are boosted by that exocom. So you can get even more faction messages. Unlike, the normal systems where you go and you hunt messages. They're not affected by loot increases. So you come into these systems, 5 is going to help, Doctor's going to help, that exocom for incursions is also going to help. Now, there are a bunch of hostiles running around in the system. Those are not the ones with the faction messages. You actually have to summon these new Borg people. Now, it's not that much faction credit. You're going to take the faction messages, and then depending on where your reputation is, you're going to exchange them for X amount of faction credit. It's not much, but it's a daily pool, so can add up over time. And because you're getting more faction credits than you may have been in the past, you can get more faction ships. So let's get right into it. I think we'll start with stfc.space. Now, some of the reasoning behind this video was it was requested, but it was requested more for the G5 rares. And the training I've had in college teaches you to kind of make content that is relative to what is going on. So I'm trying to incorporate the request and my teachings and associate this with what's going on. And what's going on is wave defense. So hostiles, rare ships usually have a ship ability associated with battling hostiles. Now, I don't remember what level you can start doing the waves in. I think it's somewhere between 25 and 35, I think. So the G3 rares do come into play. Now, actually, this is the tab I wanted open here. Start with the G3 rares. Here's the Pharrell Klingon faction Explorer. Ship ability, fighting hostiles for the first round of combat. Burrell decreases the opponent's ship armor piercing, shield piercing, accuracy by 15%. Yes, technically this does work. But notice the wording here. That's Moreau's ability. So if you're going to use Moreau, this is useless to you. Pike Moreau takes care of all of that. So it's really meaningless. Plus it only lasts for one round, which is lame. But say you don't want to use Moreau. You want to use Pike Moreau on one ship and then something else on another ship. Say the Burrell here. You would get more benefit out of that, but not a whole lot. So let's move that around. Come over to the Intrepid Federation Battleship. It's also a G3 rare. When fighting hostiles, Intrepid increases armor, shield deflection, dodge by 40%. Not limited by round. And as you can see, each level it increases. At max, it's 130%. This is Beverly from Picard Beverly. Does the same effect as Pike or Picard does when paired with Beverly. By themselves, they're a little different, but just a little bit. But you will get more out of this, I think. One, it's not limited by round. Two, if you're going to use Pike Moreau with this, the end effect, the end result is the same, but it does do it in a different way. Where Moreau reduces your opponent's piercing, this is increasing your mitigation. It's really the difference between Moreau and Beverly. So, what officers you put on the bridge are going to have effect on whether you actually see results with this ship ability or not. But still very useful. Come to the last G3 rare. Probably the one that I think is the most useful, just because the standard operating procedure or SOP for bridge crews when you're fighting hostiles, it's usually going to be Pike Moreau Chen or Pike Moreau Talon, especially at this level. So you're not really going to see any benefit from the Burrell or the Intrepid ship ability. Gladius here, fighting hostiles, Gladius increases damage by 35%. That's at level 1. At max, it goes up to 80%. So that's damage increase. You will see that. You will see effect of that fighting any hostile. Certain hostiles are gonna have such large hulls that you're not gonna see it affect that much, but you will see it some movement in your damage numbers. Which one you should get? It's tough. To a certain extent, I think the Gladius is more useful, but at the same time, it wants crystal. So, more crystal you spend on the Gladius, the less crystal you have to spend on miners. So there's that. But, for the most part, when you're fighting hostiles, whether it be you grinding your hostiles normally or you're in your wave defense, interceptors are going to be the fastest. So, lots of use there. Alright, so let's get on to the... Actually, I want to do this first, I think. Because I want to go in and I will show you why I did what I did. Where are y'all at? Somewhere around here. Alright, here y'all are. Now, especially when you get into G5, you have far more faction credit opportunities. The scouts, like I said, your dailies. You probably have a higher syndicate, so you're even getting even more from your dailies. Away teams, you've probably been playing a bit, and you're stronger. You have higher rewards from that Bajoran uncommon chest that hands out trade XP. And therefore, you could probably max out your faction away team missions much easier. It's not even a critical hit for me anymore. It's 100%, so I just get it. More faction credit for me. Oh, and then they added the G5 Armada chest, which can be pretty damn good if you're doing enough Armadas. So, I had enough faction credit, I got 2 G5 rares. For the most part, looking at this Kuv Sampak, remember I can't speak Klingon, this is probably the slickest looking of the ships, I think. I think it looks awesome. Very good job at visually designing this. So, I got me a Sampak. Now, I'll get on the shipability when I get back to scfc.space. You can see that. The Crozier here, I don't like the saucer design. I think it's stupid looking. That, and you got some ridiculous, and the Crozier here is designed a little differently, but you got this little back compartment that comes out, or sometimes there's a compartment that goes down and then back, and then you go back up, and then back again for your nacelles. And it just looks weird. I don't like the look of it. It looks, in my opinion, stupid. So, I didn't get it. Plus, it's a battleship slow as shit. And then you come into, the Sanctus here. It's the Interceptor. Interceptors are, for the most part, they're faster. I mean, it looks okay. It doesn't look as good. I mean, it doesn't look nearly as cool looking as the Sampak, in my opinion. It does look neat. But what really sold me, and we'll go back to scfc.space here, was the shipability. Fighting hostile, Sanctus decreases hostile shield health by 10% at the beginning of each round for the first 5 rounds. Shield stripping. Shield stripping is very useful. Unless you're fighting swarms, because then there's no shield there. So in wave defense, or really in hostile grinding in general, stripping shields it's very useful, because you have to go through the shields anyway. Most likely. Unless you're using Pike Moreau, new Pike. Then you probably don't have to go through the shields. Now, they're kind of wonky, these ship abilities. They don't increase with each level, more increasing with each tier. See, 10% for the first tier, 11 for the second, then 12, then 13, then 16. Makes you wonder why they didn't go by level, because then you could have incorporated 14 and 15. Seems weird to skip some numbers here, but okay. Then 16, 17, 18, 19. You don't get to 20, but by, what tier is this, 8? Or I guess it's 9. 9, you get to 22. Well, 5 rounds, 20%, all your shields are gone. So, if you last 5 rounds, and you're using a Sanctus, you don't really have to worry about the shields, which is nice. It's why we love Yuki. Or we used to really love Yuki, but because of the way the game has changed, kind of fell out of favor a little bit. But with this being a ship ability, kind of brings it back in. I keep highlighting it. I don't want to... And you can see when you get to max tier 12... Of course, who the hell does that? Because there's not enough currency to tier these dumb things up, which is stupid. Whatever. Gets to 25%, which is 125%, which I guess makes sense. Doesn't really make sense to me, but okay. And that is why I think the Sanctus is the best. 1, you got the speed. 2, you got the shield stripping. I mean, that's just the best for hostiles. Now, come over to the Sampak. This is the better looking one, but its shipability, Fighting hostile, sound pack decreases hostile armor piercing, shield piercing, accuracy by 12% for the first 5 rounds. It's not, again, that's Moreau there. So you're not really getting that much benefit, because for the most part you are going to have a mitigation officer, because this just isn't, it's not doing enough. Maybe when you come up to, getting up here to tier 10 and it's over 100%, maybe you're doing a little bit, but not really until you get that much higher. You kind of got to get up there before you actually see benefit from this. Of course, if you want to use Pike Moreau Data, which I really like, or Picard Beverly Data, or New Picard, or Janeway, get that isolytic damage, you're not going to see too much of this. You'd only really see a lot of benefit here is if you don't put a mitigation officer on the bridge, which can work, but you kind of got to be high tier for this. So I honestly would rate this one last. If I like the look of it, and that's really why I got it. Sometimes you got to figure out what will make you happy and do that. It looks nice. Shipability isn't that useful, but it looks cool, so there's a benefit there. I do think, however, the Crozier shipability is much better. I don't think it's as good as the Sanctus. Maybe a little bit, depending on who you are and how you like the crew, or what crew you're going to use, can be very good. It definitely got much better with the release of Hugh. When fighting hostiles, uses Crozier, decreases hostile crit damage. Oh, I'm sorry, it decreases hostile crit damage. I thought it increased your crit damage. Decreases hostile crit damage by 2% for the first 5 rounds of combat. Dyslexia came in a little bit, I think. Are there any hostiles that actually have high critical hits? I don't know. I don't think so. At the same time, when you get up here, you're actually going to see some movement here. Very high numbers as far as decreasing your hostiles' crit damage. So when they do critical hit, you see a lot less damage. You're going to see a lot smaller shot. For the most part, I think most hostiles are at about 150% crit damage. Unless they themselves have not a critical, but they have a ship ability, which some hostiles do. Say it increases their crit damage or something. Which I think there are. I don't think there's one that increases critical hit chance, but I think there is one that increases crit damage. I can't remember. Essentially, this is Gala. Now, Gala is a very useful officer. I'm not saying that she's not, but there's kind of a reason why we don't grind hostiles with Gala. There's not that much benefit. You don't move the needle that much because hostiles usually don't critical hit you that often. Usually they're about 10% crit chance, which isn't that much. It's really not. Even if they were up to 20%, that still isn't a whole lot. But there is some use here. It will reduce the damage you take, which is a good thing. Because essentially it is a defensive officer, but since it's not increasing your own mitigation, it is reducing the damage you receive, but in a different way. So you could get even more reduction. It's useful. I'm not saying it's not useful. Where this ranks, where the Crozier ranks in the G5 rares, I do still think Even though it is different than what I originally thought. I do think it's the second best as far as shipability goes. Just because I don't see a whole lot of use in the Sompex shipability. I just don't. It's just not going to move the needle at all. You're not going to see. You're probably not even going to see it in the battle log because you're going to have a defensive officer on there, unless you get up to tier 9 or 10 with these, and then maybe you won't even need to put a mitigation or a defensive officer on the bridge, and then you might actually see it. But look, unless you're a whale, you're not going to see these ships up that high. There's just not enough rare ship hearts out there for you. I mean, maybe that's changed. I mean, we'll see in a month or two when I start trying to get mine up there. We'll see. Now, the downside with the Crozier is it's going to be slower. It's a battleship. They're just going to be slower. So, at least I'm pretty sure. Let's double check here because you can see the details here. Impulse for the Sanctus 195. Where's the Crozier? 175. So while you're going to have a lot more damage out of the battleship, battleships usually have a little bit more hull and a little bit more damage than their other two. It's going to be so much slower. So is it going to be good for you in wave defense? That depends. I do think you don't get that much use out of impulse speed if you're sitting on the leg, I guess, that is all explorers. You got all those Federation explorers coming in. If you're in the middle of that group, you're not seeing too much for impulse speed increase there. Where you're really going to see the impulse is when you're trying to cross sides of the map. The hostiles are right next to each other. You kill one hostile, you go to another hostile. It takes like 1 or 2 seconds to get there. Is 100 more impulse really going to do anything? Instead of taking 2 seconds to get to the hostile, it'll take 1 second. Okay. Not a whole lot of difference there. So potentially that is something you may want to do. I mean, I've thought about getting a Crozier. I mean, I have. Because of the way this faction credits are sourced. I don't think I'll get all 3. Though, keep getting some blueprints in those Armada chests, which is nice. It is something to consider. Most likely, players coming into G5 now will be able to get at least 2 rares. And I recommend getting 2 rares, mostly because wave defense. And don't forget about solo armadas. You got 3 spots in your solo armada. Getting 2 ships around your level? Yeah. And then you have the one that was, where you were, the level you were before. Say the uncommon. You have 1 uncommon and 2 rares. It's going to be much easier doing all your solo armadas. And it's going to be much easier to do wave defenses. Especially with the rares. The rares are very good. Once you get about to, I want to say, tier 6, maybe tier 7, you can start using a lot more speed crew. You don't have to crew up for damage as much. Maybe a little bit more for mitigation. But you can do that speed and therefore take multiple legs with the same ship. But again, you're going to see a lot less effect on the Crozier because its base impulse speed is smaller. Which does kind of suck. So we'll wrap this up here. I do think you should, at least whenever you reach that point, whether it be 32 or 46 or 56, I do think you should get at least 1 of the rares. Depending on where your faction credit is, depending on where your material income is, you can possibly get a second one. It's not a bad idea. It's really not. 1, they're going to help you with hostile grinding. 2, especially with the 46 rares, Let's loot increase. Who doesn't want loot increase? I maxed my Coronar because I'm 56 now. So what do you think 120% the loot increase does on an 80 plus million Coronar? For me, it does a lot. Very good. I love it. I don't use it a whole lot anymore, but it's there if you need it. And even if you are still 46, the loot increase is very nice. And having 2 ships that do that is very nice, especially during solo armadas. It works on solo armadas. All right. And I do think, as far as the G5 rares go, with all this stuff that's going on, especially the new stuff, let's say Wave Defense, I do think the Sanctus, you're going to see more usefulness out of the Sanctus's ship ability. And you're going to see more usefulness out of the Sanctus just because it does have the fastest impulse speed of the 3. I do think the second best as far as being able to engage with wave defense. I do think the second best will be the Crozier because I think you're going to see more out of its ship ability. Yeah, it's slower, I know. It's not a whole lot slower than, let's say, the Sompek, because the Sompek impulse speed is 185. What's 10 impulse when you're talking about difference between a 185 and a 175? Sure, one's faster and one's slower, but it's not that much. It's not that much, especially if you can see usefulness out of the ship ability. Whereas, let's say, the Sompek, which I think is the third best out of 3. Yeah, you won the bronze medal. Congratulations. How many competitors were there? Are there like 100? No, there were 3. Oh, so you were last. Yeah, you were in last place. Just don't see the needle being moved with the Sompek's ship ability. Just don't. Of course, that is based on tier. The higher the tier, the more you're going to see something, maybe. Comment below. Have you gotten 256 yet? And which of the G5 rares do you think is the best? All you players out there should be able to, for the most part, view or look at screenshots. Which one of the G5 rares do you think looks the best? And while we're at it, which ship in this game do you think is the neatest looking? Neatest looking. And for those of you that may be moving into G5, coming up on G5 rares, which ship are you the most excited to acquire and play around with? Be sure to like and subscribe. I am the Angry Rhino. Shields up, Commanders.